Welcome to Networking RX, a podcast devoted to helping business professionals like you enhance your networking skills in order to become more proficient giving and receiving quality business referrals and improving the overall quality of your life and the lives of those around you. The Networking RX podcast is a production of AmSpirit Business Connections, an organization whose mission is to empower business success through networking.
Back in September, my wife and I were invited to a wedding. It was the daughter of a friend of my wife's, and it was a wedding and reception all at the same place. And I know weddings come in all shapes and sizes, and there's really nothing normal to a wedding. So they're all different. But this particular wedding, you went to a venue, very nice venue. Had the ceremony, and then immediately next to the courtyard, it was a beautiful day, was the reception area. A little outdoors, a little indoors, whatever. And so you're seated at a table, and we're seated at a table, and some of the people we knew, some of the people we didn't know, but we all had the connection of being connected to the bride's family. In this case, my wife's friend, and there were other people who were at the table who were also friends, but may have been connected to the husband of the bride. So anyhow, but it was interesting. I'm an introvert, right? I'm an introvert. I don't need that situation. I will endure it. I don't mean it to sound like that. It's these people are good people, fun. But I don't need it like I need. I don't need Girl Scout cookies. But I'll have Girl Scout cookies, kind of a thing, right? It's wasn't, there supporting my wife, but some people just think, wow, this is great. I'm excited. I get to go to this. That's just not me, right? And it's nothing against the people or the setting or anything. It was wonderful. Everything about it was beautiful. But what I find myself tending to do in those situations, do a lot of people watching, a lot of listening, and I'd love to just hear how conversations flow, how it goes from one topic to the next. And I can just sit there and I'll do this at airports too. I'll just be sitting there waiting for a flight and just listening to people engaging in conversation, people who know each other, people who don't know each other, and just sit there and listen to how these conversations flow. And I find it fascinating how they work, and you can learn a lot from how people operate within conversations. I like to think I'm relatively good at carrying a conversation, even though I'm not not totally comfortable. I don't need to. I don't get my energy from being in those circumstances. I do go because, well, certainly professionally, because that's my business. But I need my quiet time to sort of recharge. But I'm intrigued by how these conversations flow and how people hit it off. And for the most part, people do hit it off. They tend to stay on topics. Like if you have somebody who's aligned with more liberal issues, a Democrat, blue, and talking to somebody who's more conservative, or Republican or red, they can get along, right? They'll get along, and they will stay away from the hot wire topics, right? You have two people talking. It's like, oh, okay, we really love the Ohio State Buckeyes. Let's just focus all our attention on the Ohio State Buckeyes. Whereas if the conversation were political, it would just it might blow up. Who knows? Who knows anymore? But in thinking back to that experience, it reminded me of an article I stumbled upon shortly thereafter. It was an article that I got. It's from the podcast Hidden Brain, and I've listened to Hidden Brain for a number of years. But it talked about some research, and basically what it says is good conversations don't have to be agreeable. Researchers tracked conversations between both friends and strangers as they talked and scanned the participants' brains in real time. Afterwards, they asked people to rate the level of enjoyment and productivity they felt during the conversation. Surprisingly, the most enjoyable conversations weren't those where the brain activity stayed perfectly in sync. Instead, the best conversation showed increasing divergence in neural patterns, which suggests that exploring new ideas and perspective rather than staying on familiar ground leads to deeper engagement. And this held true for both friends and strangers. And so I started to look into this, and obviously there's some terms here, neurosynchronicity, and that just refers to when people's brain activity is similar throughout time. Um, and obviously, we live in a wonderful time. You're not having to guess at these things. People have little monitors on their heads, little caps that measure brain activity. Um, so the hypothesis or the intuitive guess as to how it would work is that the more your brain mirrors mine, the better we connect. Um, but this study kind of challenges that view. Is that, yeah, we don't always have to be in sync. Here's a way of thinking about it, if you will. Imagine two hikers are walking in the forest. When they start out, they stick close together, right? They're close to one another. And I've been on hikes with my wife and other people, and it kind of, hey, we don't know where we're at. Let's just stay together, kind of a thing. But as things get more comfortable, one will veer off to inspect a flower or do whatever. Um, you know, listen and look at birds, and so the roots they become divergent or they get a little more spread out, but still they're together. But they're each kind of taking their own path at little points along the way. And that's what makes the hike more enjoyable. And it's the same thing with conversations, whether you're talking to friends or you're talking to total strangers. Um, you know, being totally in sync on things doesn't necessarily make it a great conversation. Um, you know, you're going to delve into different things and you're going to touch on this and touch on that. And I even find that with respect to my conversations. At this particular wedding, I found myself talking to somebody who else was at the table. I've never met this person before, but we just started to chat, professionally. I went to law school. He was a judge. So obviously we have the legal background to talk about. Where'd you go to school? Kind of a program was it in? I mean, there are some law schools where it's 3 years kind of in class, and others where it's an executive program. What I mean by that is, you'll go to law school at night and on the weekends and work during the day. So what type of program, kinds of internships, what type of law do you practice? How did nobody goes to school to be a judge. You practice law and then you run to be a judge. You get elected to be a judge. Okay, we're both, who do you know? We found common ground. It was kind of, we were all over the place, right? And there were things that I would say were things we did, things we disagreed on. But there were things that we touched on briefly and then moved on quickly. One point it came up, where I grew up, and I grew up in the many of I've shared on here. Many of you might know. I grew up in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, 4 hours north of Green Bay, little town Houghton, Michigan. And I kind of mentioned the UP, and yeah, I grew up in Michigan's UP. Okay, where? Here, he's like, oh, we go to Isle Royal every year. Well, if you're going to go to Isle Royal, you're going to leave from my hometown. Generally speaking, it's a national park, and the main boat and the main seaplanes will leave from Houghton, Michigan. So all of a sudden, we're kind of picking away at it, and it became very enjoyable because we got to start talking about things that I was familiar with, things he was familiar with, and we were touching on things where we didn't necessarily connect, and we would just move on from those. And it was an enjoyable conversation. Will I ever talk to that person again? I don't know. Possibly. Possibly my wife is friends with his wife. So who knows? the point to this is, in networking, we have conversations, and we have conversations with people we know, and we have conversations with people we don't know. And that we don't necessarily need to stick to topics where we're totally aligned. We don't need to have conversations where we stay in perfect sync with one another. Whether it's the topic or the tone or whatever, it's going to veer. It's going to, there's going to be a little bit of humor. It's going to be serious. It's going to be this. It's going to be that. And it's just going to kind of be all over the places. And there'll be hits and there'll be misses, and there'll be exploring things and curiosity and learning about, okay, this and that. And we are charged by, we're energized by, curiosity and learning. Conversations are not necessarily fun where everybody's in agreement on everything and everybody's sharing information that we all know. Conversations are fun and productive and energizing when that's not necessarily the case. And obviously you don't want a heated debate for a conversation. It's Goldilocks, right? This porridge is too hot, this porridge is too cold. It just needs to be just right. And those tend to be the most enjoyable conversations. So the big takeaway from this is that curiosity and mutual exploration tend to build better relationships, better bridges than having people who have the same convictions and feel this pressure to align with one another. It's okay to be curious, to learn from each other, explore things, explore topics, things like that. That's where we have the most enjoyment with respect to conversations. And when we have enjoyable conversations, those are the ones we tend to return to, and those where we build the best relationships.
Thanks for joining us on the Networking RX podcast. Please put what you've learned into action today and let us know if you have questions, comments, or ideas for future topics. You can email them to us at podcast@amspirit.com. That's AMSPIRIT.com. Finally, so you never miss an episode, be sure to subscribe to the Networking RX podcast through iTunes, Overcast, or however you receive your podcasts. Now get out and network with someone.
The Networking RX podcast is the copyright production of AmSpirit Business Connection. All rights reserved.